The movie begins as we enter Cooper's Diner, located in the small town of Grove Hill. What seems like a casual conversation between four friends, Bobby, Steve, Mike, and Carol, turns out to be a disturbing plan in the making. They aim to take this year's Halloween hazing up a notch to make sure that their target, a seemingly innocent teen boy, is left hysterically petrified. Little do they know, however, about the terrifying way they are going to pay for this little bullying trick of theirs. The group divulges a little into their victim's story, and we find out that his name is Jacob. They continue to refer to him as a freak, for he is actually an intellectually disabled castaway who has recently landed a job at the carnival. Having a tradition of beating him up at his house every Halloween, they want to change it up this year, bully him in public at his new workplace. As the boys continue to get giddy from this prospect, Carol seems apprehensive. She even confronts them about it, stating that they are not children anymore. When they make a joke of her concerns, she stands up in disbelief and leaves. Mike and Bobby then approach an employee of the diner, Gus, who seems excited by their plan and begs to be a part of it. They agree, but on one condition. He has to sort out some free stuff for them. The scene changes and we meet the freak in question. He is silently sitting in front of the blank TV, munching on a bowl of candy corn. Symbolically or coincidentally, who knows? Taking a glance at the time, he gets up and leaves his house, riding his bike into the distance, carrying a pumpkin basket. He arrives at the carnival a little late, disappointing the owner. The owner is a small man named Lester, stage name Dr. Death, who forgives Jacob and warmly welcomes him into their formed family. Meanwhile, Mark and his friends, including Carol at the request of her boyfriend Steve, are already at the carnival, waiting for a sight of Jacob. Carol, still anxious, warns Steve that she has a bad feeling about the whole thing. He, as usual, brushes off her fears. As Mark signals Jacob's arrival, the culprits move toward their victim. They corner him, while Lester, or Dr. Death, begins his show on the stage outside, oblivious to the tragedy that is about to strike. Steve grabs Jacob, but just as he's about to retaliate, Mike warns that if he makes any move, they'll actually inflict harm upon him. Still, Jacob successfully lands a good punch on Steve. This, unfortunately, sends the boys into a fit of rage, and they pound Jacob with kicks and punches until he is no more. In the background, Carol lets out a silent scream as she watches her friends brutally kill the boy. Some time has passed, and Lester is desperately calling out Jacob's name to no avail, cradling his battered and bruised body. We see a glimpse of an inconsolable Carol elsewhere, while the boys pace around her, gaslighting themselves into thinking that their actions were an act of self-defense. Just as before, Carol storms away from them in disbelief. Back in Lester's trailer, he opens a wood box amidst ominous music. It contains a book, a candle, and a frightening mask. Lighting the candle, he puts the mask on Jacob's dead face and starts to recite the ritualistic passages written in the book. When he stops, there is a long beat of silence. Then, we hear heavy breaths and a glimmer of victory in Lester's eyes, looking at whatever has risen up before him. The next morning, a cop, Sheriff Bramford, is patrolling a peaceful neighborhood when he suddenly sees a glimpse of a man drenched in blood. Of course, the mirage disappears just as he goes to investigate it. His associate, Marcy, then contacts him, telling him about a situation at the station. When Bramford gets there, he discovers a distraught Carol, who then proceeds to tell him about the prank her friends pulled. She highlights her worry that the guys might have killed him. It is also revealed that the sheriff is in fact Mike's father, and he says that he is going to have a chat with his son if he has done something wrong. But Carol pleads with him to not tell Mike about her confession. Later, Bramford arrives at the fairgrounds to investigate, and we see a weirdly calm Lester tell him that Jacob is alive, just beaten up badly. He even goes about how the cop is just like every other law enforcer, who always arrives late and can't be trusted. The dejected sheriff then informs Marcy that there has been no homicide, but he is going to go to Jacob's house to talk to him anyway. When he gets there, the house seems to be abandoned as no one answers his knocks or calls. Yet, as he is getting back in his car, we see a lowly, growling figure peering at him from between the nearby trees. Elsewhere, Carol gets a phone call where a sinister voice declares that he knows what she has done. She almost has a heart attack when she looks outside of her window and finds Steve scaring her by wearing a mask. They have a conversation about that night again, which ends up with a mere apology by Steve as he leaves. Afterwards, Carol is reading a headline about the carnival at a cafe when Mike approaches. He tells her that he didn't like that she told his father about what happened like a scaredy cat. He warns her to keep her mouth shut, and she pushes him away and walks out. At the same cafe, Gus boasts about the crazy night he had to his brother, Chet, and they share a laugh. Soon after, Gus is in the restroom and he sighs when he hears the thudding on the floor. He gets out and finds a pumpkin basket placed on the sink, filled with candy corn, and there he is. The dead man in the mask slams Gus into the wall as the older man sputters out apologies. Growling, Jacob continues to choke Gus until he is dead. Somewhere else, Carol tells Steve how Mike cornered her this morning. After a moment, a boy arrives to inform them about Gus. Back in the cafe, Sheriff Bramford and Officer Conrad are securing the murder's evidence, as well as the candy corn shoved in the body's throat. The sheriff speaks to the shell-shocked Chet, telling him that he'll need to come to the station to file the report. Meanwhile, Steve and Carol arrive at the scene, and Bramford takes them with him, in hopes to get any information that will help with the case. Bramford gets to know that Gus was there when the four friends beat up Jacob, but he thinks the murder a mere coincidence, as Gus was part of numerous dodgy activities, such as drugs. In the car, his associate, Officer Fox, expresses his fear. He has never seen someone murdered so horrendously and is dreading to look for whoever did this. Bramford assures him that he will get to the bottom of the situation. Thus, he decides to go to the carnival to investigate further. At Bobby's house, the friends meet up to discuss the situation. Mike is visibly irritated when the others share their doubts about the connection between Gus's death and Jacob. He, just like his father, dismisses it as a coincidence and walks away in anger. When everyone leaves, Bobby hears a strange sound coming from the hallway. At first, he thinks it's his friends joking with him. Going out to inspect, he also finds the pumpkin basket laying on the floor. Tentative, he walks over to it when the masked man pushes him against the wall, mercilessly ripping out his spine and ending him. At the carnival grounds, Bramford and Officer Fox are already fed up with Lester dodging their questions. Lester then asks them if they are implying that he had anything to do with Gus's murder, but Bramford says that they are just trying to collect any helpful information. When asked about Jacob, Lester says that he doesn't know where he went after they brought him back to the house. Bramford grows doubtful, as he couldn't find Jacob at his place that morning. Before things can escalate, however, Officer Conrad arrives at the trailer, bearing the news of Bobby's death. Arriving at the crime scene, the officers are grief-stricken to see Bobby's dismembered body. Both are horrified to find similarities between how Gus and Bobby were killed. Going back to the station, the sheriff orders a curfew at night as he arms himself with guns and declares that no one is even allowed to leave or enter the town. Later, the town residents are calling Marcy in a frenzy, demanding to know why a curfew has been placed. Still, Marcy can only reply with one statement. She doesn't know, she's just following orders. Bramford, the worried father, requests Mike to stay safe, respect the curfew, and forbids him to leave the house. He asks Mike about that night again, suspecting that the carnival freaks are behind the crimes, but Mike refuses to speak with him. Despite his arrogant nature, it seems that Mike has heeded his father's warning, because he calls Steve and Carol to tell them that the Halloween party has been canceled. Carol is, however, unconcerned about the situation as she takes delight in having Steve home, all to herself. Meanwhile, Bramford and Fox return to Jacob's house, but they find it empty again. This time, though, the stakes are too high to just leave the place like the cop did last time. Instead, they break into the house, looking for any lead. A few moments later, Fox incessantly calls the sheriff to come upstairs. The room is filled with a horrid smell, buzzing with the ceaseless sound of flies. They find a package hidden in the room, covered in cloth. As soon as they unveil it, they take a step back with a gasp. Inside is a decaying skull, swarming with flies. Cutting back to Carol and Steve, we find that they have ignored the warnings and sneaked off to the theater, in hopes of nothing but a thrill. Elsewhere, Lester wonders what his co-workers at the carnival are concerned about. He asks what is wrong, and a man with an eye patch, Gate, demands him to tell the truth about Jacob, but Lester tells him to sit down. Similarly, we move back and forth between scenes of Carol and Lester as tensions rise. We get a peek at Carol calling out to Steve, not finding him anywhere. She notices the candy corn-filled pumpkins and shouts Steve's name, asking him if this is a joke. At the trailer, Lester slips into his monologue, exclaiming with pride in what he does, and they should do the same. He is not ashamed of how he decides to retaliate when evil people do. When they belittle him, take their own. He is not wrong in what he does. He rallies them to defend their carnival. The town is out for a witch hunt, he says, and when they arrive, the freaks should give them what they came for. Carol is alarmed by the prolonged absence of Steve as she continues to call out for him. Suddenly, we see Steve emerge from the dark, and Carol is delighted, although that only lasts for a moment. Blood is streaming down from his skull and he collapses. Carol runs to him, desperately trying to keep him awake. It is no help. His eyes lose their spark as he lays there dying. Carol hopelessly looks around for any help, but Jacob stands behind her, apparently out of the blue. As soon as she sees the bloody mask, she runs away and screams for anyone to come, but Jacob is quick to follow her into the theater. Savagely, he pulls her against him and shreds her tongue to pieces. Blood starts spurting out of her mouth and she dies on the spot, although the aftermath this time is different. Just as Jacob is about to walk away after laying Carol's body next to Steve, he falls on the floor unconscious. Next, in the trailer, we see Lester begging and shouting at Jacob to wake up, as their work still remains to be done. Returning from Jacob's house, Fox questions Bramford if he thinks Jacob killed his own mother, referring to the corpse they found in the house. The sheriff tells him that he has no idea, for the details are still quite vague. When Fox tries to broach the subject again, Bramford yells at him to stop. On the way, the officers notice Steve's car outside the theater and end up discovering Steve and Carol's bodies laying on the stage. Bramford can be seen dreading the conversation when he calls his son to tell him about the death of his friends. Mike totally breaks down and in his grief goes to confront Lester at the trailers. Jacob is still down and Lester informs Gate that he needs fresh blood to survive. He then orders Gate to keep Mike busy while he helps Jacob recover. Mike is knocked out by Gate and his associates. Lester, on the other hand, goes to the sheriff's home. There, one of Lester's men hits Bramford in the head as soon as he arrives. Back at the grounds, Mike is tied to a chair as he is forced to watch the carnival. Over the speakers, Lester's voice announces the start of the show, and Mike is allowed to leave the tent. There, the sheriff's cruiser pulls up. Momentarily, Mike feels joyful. Then, his joy turns into horror as he looks at his father's decapitated head mounted on the car, with the eyes and nose gouged off. He sobs uncontrollably, which is followed by Jacob's appearance. The masked man rips Mike's arms off and kicks him towards the ground. Blood splatters all over the ground, and Lester's laugh echoes, candy corn in his hand. Nodding at Jacob, he returns to his trailers, and we unfortunately bear witness to Jacob tearing Mike's teeth from his mouth, one by one. The screen turns to black. We move on to another scene, and it seems that some time has passed. Another carnival is happening, and a woman is talking to Lester in his tent, relatively excited. She asks him if the teeth on his necklace are real, for which he replies that everything in his shop has a long history behind it, and that the teeth are real. As long as the freaks of the world continue to hold down innocent people like him, he'll ensure to restore the balance. The film ends with a creepy yet corny shot of Jacob, the bloody masked man, stuffing his mouth with some candy corn, which suspiciously have an uncanny resemblance to human teeth.